Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, host of the Football History Dude podcast, right here on the Sports History Network. Now, before we jump into another sports history adventure, let me tell you about this episode's sponsor. We partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get deals on over 30,000 autographed sports collectibles. They even have film, music, and other entertainment autographs on the site, so there's something for everyone. Perhaps you're looking for a gift for Mother's Day, or maybe Father's Day. Heck, who needs a holiday as an excuse to give a piece of sports history to your loved ones? Or how about yourself? Today seems like a great day to add to your sports cave, right? But how is RSA able to offer such great deals on JSA authentication, you ask? Well, they do this by making deals directly with athletes, so there are no extra markups, and they choose to pass these savings on to the customer. All orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and money-back guarantee. And to make sure RSA knows that the Sports History Network sent you, we created a special link for you. All you have to do is head to shoprsa.com/SHN. Again, that's shoprsa.com/SHN. Head over there to get your piece of sports history today. This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Yesterday's Sports on the Sports History Network. Today, in part 3 of the best NFL teams of the 1970s, we'll talk about the 5th best team, and that would be the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings began the 1970 season by getting a small measure of revenge for their Super Bowl loss to the Kansas City Chiefs 8 months earlier, beating them 27-10 in the home opener. In a Week 5 game against the Cowboys, the Vikings showed the world that they were every bit as good as they were in 1969. By whipping Dallas 54-13. They finished the season with 12 wins and only 2 losses, and most people saw them as the heavy favorite to win the NFC title. But the San Francisco 49ers had other ideas and beat the Purple Gang in the playoffs 17-14. Most Vikings fans thought the difference between the 1969 team and the 1970 team was that management failed to re-sign their fiery quarterback, Joe Kapp. Kicker Fred Cox, running back Dave Osborne, receiver Gene Washington, defensive end Carl Eller, strong safety Carl Kosulke, and defensive tackles Alan Page and Gary Larson made the Pro Bowl. Page and Eller also made All-Pro. The 1971 Vikings finished the season 11-3. While their offense was not overpowering, scoring over 20 points in only 5 games, their defense was, pitching 3 shutouts and allowing more than 10 points in only 5 games. The Vikings faced the Dallas Cowboys in the playoffs and lost 20-12. It was clear that they needed a top-notch quarterback if they were going to get back to the Super Bowl. Receiver Bob Grimm, offensive tackle Ron Yary, Carl Eller, Alan Page, and free safety Paul Krause made the Pro Bowl. Page, Yary, and Eller made All-Pro. Page also won the NFL MVP award. 1 month after losing to Dallas in the playoffs, the Vikings worked out a trade with the New York Giants for quarterback Fran Tarkenton, who had played for Minnesota from 1961 to 1966. But the trade didn't pay off, or at least it didn't seem it did, as the Vikings finished the season an extremely disappointing 7-7. Tarkington didn't play poorly, but the team seemed to be lacking the same fire they had when Joe Kapp was there. 4 players made it to the Pro Bowl: Ron Yary, Paul Krause, Alan Page, and receiver John Gilliam. Yary also made All-Pro. The team got some bad news right before training camp started. Defensive back Carl Kosalki had a motorcycle accident and was paralyzed from the waist down. Whatever was lacking on the 1972 team was not lacking on the 1973 team. After a Week 9 win over the Lions, the Vikings were the only undefeated team in the NFL. They finished the regular season at 12-2 and then beat the defending NFC champion Washington Redskins in the playoffs. They traveled to Dallas for the NFC Championship and beat the Cowboys 27-10. Next, it was on to the Super Bowl to face the defending NFL champion Miami Dolphins. It was no contest as the Dolphins ran all over the Purple People Eaters defense for a 24-7 victory. John Gilliam, Paul Krause, middle linebacker Jeff Seaman, Ron Yary, running back Chuck Foreman, Alan Page, and Carl Eller made the Pro Bowl. Yary, Page, and Eller also made All-Pro. And Chuck Foreman won Rookie of the Year. The 1974 Vikings got off to a fast start, winning their first 5 games, and then lost 4 of their next 9 to finish at 10-4. They had no trouble with the Cardinals in the playoffs, winning easily 30-14. Next up were the Rams, whom they had lost to in a Week 11 matchup. Minnesota won this time 14-10, and they were on their way to the Super Bowl for the second year in a row. But for the third time in 6 years, the Vince Lombardi Trophy slipped through their grasp. Fran Tarkington, Chuck Foreman, John Gilliam, Ron Yary, Paul Krause, Carl Eller, and Alan Page made the Pro Bowl. Yary and Page made All-Pro again. After 10 weeks, the 1975 Vikings were undefeated. But their 10-0 record was somewhat misleading, as not one of those 10 opponents ended the season with a winning record. The Vikings lost 3 of their next 5 games, including a playoff loss to Dallas. There would be no trip to the Super Bowl this year. Fran Tarkington, Chuck Foreman, John Gilliam, cornerback Bobby Bryant, Paul Krause, Ron Yary, guard Ed White, Jeff Seaman, and Alan Page made the Pro Bowl. Page, Krause, Foreman, Yary, and Tarkington also made All-Pro, and Tarkington won the NFL MVP award. The Vikings were an aging team, and if they were ever going to win a Super Bowl, 1976 might be their last chance. At the midway point of the season, they had a game, and they finished the regular season with an 11-2-1 record. They easily defeated the Redskins 35-20 in the playoff game, and then beat up on the Rams 24-13. Vikings fans had high hopes that this would finally be the year they would win the Super Bowl. But their 4th trip to the big game was no different than the other 3. Minnesota was never in the game and suffered a humiliating 32-14 beating. Tarkington and Foreman made the Pro Bowl again, along with receivers Sammy White, Bobby Bryant, Jeff Seaman, Alan Page, Ed White, and Ron Yary, who also made All-Pro. Sammy White won Rookie of the Year. A 42-10 win over the Bengals in Week 9 of the 1977 season gave Minnesota a 6-3 record. But Tarkington went down with an injury and was lost for the remainder of the season. Backup Bob Lee took over, and the Vikings' 9-5 record was good enough for another division title and a trip to Los Angeles for the playoffs. The Rams beat the Vikings 35-3 in a Week 6 matchup, but the Purple Gang got their revenge on a rain-soaked field, winning 14-7. Now it was on to Dallas to face the Cowboys. It would be their fourth trip to the NFC Championship in the last 5 years, but the eventual Super Bowl champion Cowboys were too strong for the Vikings, winning 23-6. Chuck Foreman, Sammy White, Jeff Seaman, Ed White, Ron Yary, and linebacker Matt Blair made the Pro Bowl. The 1978 Vikings struggled all season long, but thanks to playing in an extremely weak division, their 8-7-1 record was good enough for first place and a trip to the playoffs. But the Rams defeated them easily, 34-10, and it was obvious that the Vikings were no longer among the NFL's elite teams. Receiver Ahmad Rashad and linebacker Matt Blair were the only players selected for the Pro Bowl. Age finally caught up with Minnesota, as many of their star players had either retired or been traded, including Tarkenton, Page, and Eller. The 1979 Vikings suffered their first losing season since 1967, finishing the season at 7-9. Rashad and Blair made the Pro Bowl again. The bottom line is the Vikings' regular season record during the 1970s was 99 wins, 43 losses, and 2 ties. Their postseason record was 7-8. Or you could say 8-9 if you include the 2 postseason games from January of 1970. They won 8 division titles, they won 3 NFC titles, but they did not win any of the 4 Super Bowls that they played in. That concludes our podcast for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Tune in again next week when we will talk about the 4th best team of the 1970s. Until then, take care and God bless.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Darren Hayes, host of the Pigskin Dispatch and Jersey Dispatch podcast. I hope you've enjoyed another great episode here on Sports History Network. Now, speaking of sports history, this episode was brought to you by Firefly Books, and they have 2 great ones for you this summer. For basketball fans, they have the NBA 75, the definitive history by author Dave Zarum, who's appeared on our Jersey Dispatch podcast recently. He tells about the experience, the thrilling journey of the NBA, from its humble beginnings to its modern glory. Uncover the untold stories of triumph, controversy, and the greatest stars of the game. This isn't just a book, it's courtside seats to over 75 years of NBA history. And for the golf enthusiasts, swing into The Golf Round I'll Never Forget by Matt Adams. Relive 50 of golf's most memorable moments through the eyes of the legends themselves. From Garcia's triumph at the 2017 Masters to Nicklaus' miraculous 1986 comeback, it's the closest you'll get to walking the fairways with golf's greatest. Get your summer read on. Grab a copy of NBA 75 or The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, available online or at your favorite bookstore.